In October of 1969, a federal land designation was filed with the Bureau of Land Management's Arizona District Office. The document was 3 pages. The first page listed a parcel in the eastern Arizona high desert, a sandstone canyon system, roughly 4 miles in length, situated within the ancestral territory of the White Mountain Apache. The second page cited terrain instability, active erosion risk, and slope failure probability as justification for a permanent public access closure. The third page carried a signature, a date, and a file stamp. The geology cited in that document does not match the canyon. This was not immediately obvious. It took a structural geologist reviewing the original survey photographs in 1994 to note the discrepancy formally. And even then it was noted in a single line, almost parenthetical, in an assessment report that was itself never fully reviewed. The sandstone walls of that canyon are Permian formation, stable, dense, and dry. They have not shifted appreciably in 11,000 years. There is no erosion risk consistent with the designation language. The slope failure probability cited in the closure document would require soil saturation levels that the canyon's drainage pattern makes structurally impossible. The canyon drains south and east. The water table, such as it is at that elevation, sits well below the floor substrate. You could not saturate those soils meaningfully even if you tried. None of this appears in the official closure file because no one asked. The designation was processed, filed, and applied. The canyon was posted with standard federal restricted access signage. And for 25 years, no federal agency returned to verify the justification, review the geological assessment, or produce any document explaining why that particular parcel, in that particular location, was placed under permanent closure by a person whose name appears in no personnel record anyone has been able to locate. The file number is Bureau of Land Management, Arizona Field Closure, 69-214. The signature on the third page does not match any Bureau of Land Management employee in the Arizona District personnel records for 1969. It does not match any employee in the National Personnel Index for that year. The name is legible. The person does not appear to have existed. My name is Dale Whitmore. I spent 22 years as a field surveyor with the Bureau of Land Management, assigned to the Arizona District from 1988 through 1994. Before that, 2 years in the Nevada high desert, and 3 years doing contract work on federal boundary surveys in New Mexico. I have surveyed uranium tailing sites and military buffer zones and river corridor easements and private land disputes that went back 4 generations. I am not a man who reports things he cannot measure. I have spent my career in service to documentation, to accuracy, to the formal record. And I say this not to establish authority, but to establish what it cost me to arrive at this account. In the spring of 1994, I was assigned to a routine reevaluation project. The Bureau was conducting a comprehensive audit of legacy closure designations, parcels that had been locked and never revisited, some going back to the 1950s. The goal was administrative housekeeping. Confirm the justification still held, update the file, move on. I had done this kind of work before. I understood the parameters. It was methodical. It was quiet. I expected nothing from it. I received the Arizona 69-214 file in late March of that year. I read the closure language. I noted the geological classification. I pulled the original survey photographs, requested the chain of title records from the district archive, and scheduled the field assessment. I want to be precise about something before I go further. I was not looking for anomalies. I was not investigating anything unusual. I was a federal employee assigned to verify a land record. and I approached that assignment the way I had approached every assignment before it, with a clipboard, a field kit, a survey team, and no particular expectations about what I would find. I have not applied for reassignment to the Arizona District since 1994. I have not returned to Eastern Arizona in any professional or personal capacity since that spring. I want that on the record before I describe anything else. The canyon sits at an elevation of approximately 5,800 feet. At the eastern edge of the high desert country that forms the boundary of the White Mountain, Apache's ancestral territory in eastern Arizona. The nearest incorporated town is roughly 40 miles to the northwest, a small community that in 1994 had a single gas station, a post office, and a diner that opened at 5 in the morning for the ranching crews who moved cattle across that country before the heat set. The access road was unpaved, 6 miles of hardpack and loose shale off the state highway, requiring a high-clearance vehicle and approximately 40 minutes in good conditions. The canyon itself runs roughly north to south. The walls rise between 60 and 110 feet, Permian sandstone, red-brown, layered in the striated formations of that geological period, each visible band representing tens of thousands of years of sedimentary deposit. The floor is dry streambed, fine gravel, flat stones, exposed bedrock near the northern end. A single stand of ponderosa pine occupies the canyon's northernmost quarter. Trees well above average diameter for their species at that elevation. Their bark the thick orange-brown plating of old growth. There had not been seasonal flow in the streambed, according to the original 1969 survey notes, for at least 3 decades prior to that survey. My team was 3 people: Marcus Reyes, 26, a junior technician who had been with the Bureau for 18 months, precise and economical with his words. The third member was a contracted structural geologist named Gerald Cutler, 51, from Tucson, with a background in federal infrastructure assessment and a professional reputation built on exact work. He arrived with his own equipment and his own stainless steel thermos that he refilled from his truck every morning before touching anything else. He was a man of fixed habits. I understand that kind of personality. We established base camp at the canyon's southern access point on a Monday in late April. 5 days of planned assessment work. Our routine was consistent. Up before 6, Cutler made coffee. Reyes ran the equipment check: transits, ranging rods, GPS units, moisture probes, the camera kit, and I set the day's measurement sequence on the topographic map. In the canyon by 7:30, out before 6. On the afternoon of the first day, while Reyes established the initial baseline along the eastern wall, I walked the dry streambed to assess substrate for moisture probe placement, standard work. In the middle section of the streambed, approximately 140 yards north of our access point, near a slight bend in the channel, I found a cluster of flat stones arranged in a rectangular configuration. Roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, the stones had been placed deliberately. The fine gravel around them had been swept clear in a radius of approximately 18 inches, not blown clear. Swept. I photographed the arrangement, logged it with a catalog number, and noted it as a possible historical marker. Finding a stone marker in an Apache ancestral canyon is not unusual. I did not think about it again for 3 days. On the morning of the 3rd day, Reyes found the ranging rod. The previous evening, we had staked 4 ranging rods to mark the northwest perimeter of our survey area, standard procedure for maintaining visual reference across the measurement field. The rods were driven into soil at the base of the canyon's western wall, approximately 8 inches deep, spaced 20 feet apart in a line running north to south. Ranging rods are aluminum shafts, bright alternating orange and white, approximately 6 feet in length. They are not lightweight objects. Once driven into firm soil, they do not move under normal conditions. When Reyes completed his morning equipment check, he found the northernmost rod had been relocated. It was standing upright in the stream bed, approximately 60 feet from its original position, centered in the dry channel between two large flat stones. Driven into the fine gravel to a depth that required it to have been pushed in deliberately. It had not simply fallen and landed there. It was vertical and stable. Cutler walked over, looked at it, and said the soil at the wall base was looser than it appeared at that location. That wind overnight combined with the freeze-thaw cycle at that elevation could work a rod free if the initial drive had been shallow, and that thermal drafts within the canyon corridor could move a lightweight object across gravel. He said he had seen stranger things in slot canyon environments where air pressure differentials behave unexpectedly. Reyes nodded. He said it was possible. I did not say anything immediately. I walked to the original stake position and crouched to examine the soil. There was a clean cylindrical hole where the rod had been driven. The walls of the hole were undisturbed. The soil around the rim showed no signs of the compression or fracturing that accompanies a rod being pulled free under resistance. There were no drag marks in the gravel between the original position and the stream bed, no furrow, no displaced stones, no transfer of the wall-base soil onto the streambed surface. I examined the rod's base, where it had been driven into the gravel. There was no soil from the original position on it. Nothing had clung to it in transit. Someone had extracted the rod cleanly, carried it 60 feet, and set it down. Cutler's explanation was not impossible. I do not want to represent it as impossible. I documented everything with the same procedure I would apply to any anomaly: hole dimensions, rod position coordinates, a note on the absence of transfer material, and I logged it as an equipment anomaly with cause listed as undetermined. That evening, after Reyes had turned in and Cutler was working through his geology notes by lantern, I sat with my field notebook and turned to the catalog entry from day one. The rod had been placed between two flat stones that were the same type as the ones in the streambed arrangement. The same flat-faced Permian slabs, the same smooth surface. I sat with that for a while. I did not write it down. The following morning, before we returned to survey work, I drove the 40 miles to White River. I told Reyes and Cutler I had a coordination call with the district office that I preferred to take from a stable signal location. That was not accurate. The White Mountain Apache Tribe's Cultural Preservation Program operates from the Tribal Administrative Complex in White River. 2 weeks before the survey began, I had completed the standard tribal consultation protocol required for any federal assessment within or adjacent to ancestral territory, a formal notification, a request for cultural resource information, and a designated contact. The contact I had been given was the tribe's historic preservation officer, Raymond Casa. Raymond Casa was 67 years old in the spring of 1994. He had held the position of historic preservation officer for 18 years, appointed by the tribal council following a decade as a land records researcher. Before that, he had worked as a cartographer for the Arizona State Land Department. He was not a ceremonial figure. He was not a spiritual elder in the sense that word is sometimes used loosely. He was an administrator, specifically, the person responsible for maintaining the tribe's formal documentation of culturally significant sites, burial locations, territorial boundaries, and resource designations. He managed records, he enforced protocols. He kept files the way I kept files, with the same basic investment in accuracy. I had spoken to him briefly by telephone before the survey began. He had been courteous and precise, and had asked a single question when I gave him the parcel description: What is the file number? When I read it to him, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would be available if I needed to speak further. When I arrived at his office that Thursday morning, he had a folder on his desk. It was not thin. He told me that the canyon has been named in tribal records for as long as the written records extend, and that the oral designation predates the written record by an unknown period. The name translates approximately as the place that watches returning. He was careful about the translation. He said the Apache word used for watching in that designation is not the common word for passive observation, for looking at something, because it is there. It is a word that implies directed attention toward a specific expected event. Something is being watched for. Something is anticipated. The canyon watches for something to come back. He told me the formal avoidance protocol for that location appears in tribal council records as early as 1887, which is the earliest period from which consistent written documentation survives. He was confident the protocol is older. It has the characteristics of a transmitted instruction, not a created one, meaning it does not explain itself. It simply states the prohibition, but he spoke only about what he could document. He made a distinction that I want to record carefully, because I have returned to it many times in the years since. He said that belief and protocol are not the same thing. Belief is personal. It belongs to the individual. It is not enforceable. It does not require documentation. Protocol is institutional. Protocol exists because a governing body has determined that a behavior must be enforced whether or not the individual enforcing it has any personal investment in the underlying reason. The protocol for that canyon does not ask tribal members to believe anything. The tribal council does not ask anyone to accept a cosmological position. They ask them not to enter. That is the whole of it. The avoidance is required by institutional rule, and the institutional rule is written down. He had submitted formal application to have the canyon added to the National Register of Historic Places as a culturally sensitive exclusion zone on two separate occasions, in 1981 and in 1988. Both applications were returned to his office with a notation that federal review was pending. No review had been conducted. No explanation for the absence of review had been provided. The applications were simply held in a pending status that was never resolved. He told me he was speaking to me that morning more candidly than he usually spoke to federal surveyors, because the audit that had assigned me to that canyon had done something specific. It had reopened the 69-214 closure file. And reopening that file meant people were going back inside. He asked me how long my team had been in the canyon. 3 days, I told him. He looked at the folder. He said 3 days was long enough for it to have noticed us. I asked him what he meant. He said he was not going to be more specific than that in any conversation that might be documented. He said, "Go back, finish what you need to finish to close the audit and leave." I drove back in the early afternoon. I did not tell Reyes or Cutler what had been said. I logged the meeting in my personal notebook, not in the official field record. We returned to the survey site that Thursday afternoon. Reyes was completing calibration work on the transit theodolite, a precision optical instrument mounted on a tripod at the canyon's central measurement station. A marked point on exposed bedrock that we had established on the first day. Cutler was at the western wall, taking core samples at 3-meter intervals with the pneumatic extraction kit. I made camp coffee the way I did every afternoon when we returned from the access road, propane unit, the small aluminum pot. The same order of steps I had used at every remote site I had ever worked. I poured a cup and stood facing north, toward the Ponderosa stand at the canyon's far end, letting the sight settle around me the way you do after a drive. The canyon was quiet. This did not register as unusual at first. Ambient noise in canyon environments varies significantly based on wind direction, temperature differential, and wildlife activity. Quiet afternoons are not rare. But as I stood there with the coffee cooling in my hand, what I was hearing was not the variable quiet of a calm afternoon. It was complete silence. No insects, no bird movement in the ponderosa stand, no wind through the pine needles, no small animal sounds from the brush at the base of the walls. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in a mature ponderosa stand in late April, the absence of bird activity is not a natural condition. Birds are most active in that hour. The stand should have been loud. I stood and listened for approximately 4 minutes. Then I walked north along the streambed toward the pine stand. The trees were undisturbed, no wind damage, no evidence of recent animal movement in the needle debris at the base of the trunks. I walked the perimeter of the stand where the pines meet the sandstone wall, moving along the northwestern edge where the shade is deepest. And I found, in a thin deposit of wind-blown silt that had accumulated at the junction of the ponderosa root line and the sandstone base, a line of tracks. I crouched. They were bipedal. The stride length between successive impressions measured between 58 and 62 inches. The impression depth was significant in a way that stopped me. The silt layer at that location was perhaps 3 millimeters thick over hard substrate. And the tracks had not merely compressed the silt. They had pressed through it and into the substrate below. I tested the surface with my hand. It did not yield under my weight. I stood on it. My boots left no impression. The shape of the track did not correspond to any boot profile I recognized. It was longer than a standard large boot print by a significant margin. I estimated at least 4 inches, and the weight distribution across the impression was concentrated at the forward third in a way inconsistent with normal human walking gait. There was no heel strike pattern. I photographed every impression, 11 in sequence. The line of travel ran south to north, from the streambed into the pine stand, then northeast toward the canyon wall. At the wall, the tracks stopped. The final impression was on solid sandstone, not on silt, not on the fine substrate, on the face of the stone itself, approximately 4 inches above the canyon floor, in a location where the silt did not extend. The impression was in the stone, not cut, not carved, not painted or stained by differential mineral deposit. Pressed, I stood at that wall for a long time. I did not touch it. I photographed it from 4 angles. Then I walked back to camp. Ray said black bear, moving on its hind legs, a known behavior, capable of producing bipedal impressions in soft substrates, with a forward weight distribution that could account for the unusual pressure pattern I had described. He said he had read a field account from a survey team in the Sangre de Cristo Range that had been confused by exactly that type of impression until a wildlife biologist confirmed the cause. Cutler said the impression in the stone was almost certainly pre-existing, a natural surface irregularity or an old cultural marking that I had associated with the track sequence in low light because the mind looks for patterns. I did not argue with either of them. I did not mention that the final track was pressed into the stone at a depth I could seat my thumbnail in. On Friday morning, Rays went to calibrate the transit theodolite at the central measurement station, the way he did every morning. He was there for 11 minutes before his voice came over the radio level, but with something underneath it. I walked over. The theodolite's objective lens, the primary optical element at the forward end of the instrument, had been covered. Someone had placed a flat stone over it. The stone was approximately 4 inches by 3 inches. Smooth on the face that rested against the glass, rough on the exterior. I lifted it carefully with my field gloves and placed it in an evidence bag. The lens was undamaged, The stone had been set down with care. The stone was the same type as the stones in the streambed arrangement from day one. The same type as the stones the ranging rod had been placed between. I examined the instrument case next. The hard aluminum exterior of the front panel bore a series of shallow scratches along its lower half. They were not random, not the scuffs and tool marks that accumulate on field equipment over years of use. They formed a deliberate pattern. Angular lines, consistent in depth, consistent in the pressure that had produced them. Spaced in a way that suggested intention. The total length of the pattern was approximately 9 inches. It had no immediate referent in anything I had encountered in 22 years of survey work. It did not resemble any land boundary notation, any survey marker code, any agency marking system I knew. I photographed everything. Logged all dimensions. Cutler offered the most complete alternative account he could. He said teenagers, rural communities within driving distance. Quiet sites are sometimes used by local kids for exactly that kind of activity. He had found stranger vandalism at remote survey sites in populated rural areas. He was not dismissive. He said it carefully and with professional seriousness. The way a person offers the rational account when they sense that the alternatives are not useful to pursue in the middle of a work week on a federal contract. I asked him calmly whether he had observed any person, vehicle, or sign of approach on the western wall side of the canyon at any point during his 2 days of core sampling there. He had not, I asked Reyes. He had not. I forwarded the photograph of the scratching pattern to the Bureau's Regional Cultural Resources contact that afternoon via the satellite uplink we carried for exactly that purpose. The response came back 4 days later. The contact had sent it to 2 specialists. Neither identified the pattern. One noted structural similarities to certain pre-contact incised markers documented at sites in the Four Corners region, but characterized the similarity as inconclusive and possibly coincidental, unresolved. Not unexplained, unresolved. The distinction matters to me professionally. An unexplained event lacks data. An unresolved event has data that does not converge on a conclusion. They require different responses. I did not know, at that point, how to respond to what the data was producing. On Saturday morning, the 5th and final scheduled day of the survey, Gerald Cutler walked the northern perimeter of the canyon. Alone to complete his wall measurement sequence at the far end, near the Ponderosa stand. He signed out on the field log at 9:47. He was carrying his measurement kit, his field notebook, and his thermos. The northern wall was approximately 350 yards from base camp. 6 minutes at a normal walking pace. At 11:53, I noted his absence and called him on the radio. No response. At 12:15, I walked north. I found him seated at the base of the northern wall, his back against the sandstone. His field notebook open across his lap. He was conscious. His eyes were open and tracking. He was not visibly injured. He was not in apparent distress, or rather, he was not expressing distress. His face was neutral. Cutler was an expressive man in the way that people who talk through their work are expressive. His face was usually doing something. Processing, assessing. It was not doing anything. I said his name. He looked up. I asked him if he was all right. He said he was. I asked him what time he thought it was. He said approximately 10:15. It was 12:28. 2 hours and 13 minutes that he could not account for. Not a fragmented account, not a partial memory with gaps. No account. He said he had walked to the wall. He said he had positioned his measuring rod at the first mark. He said the next thing he was aware of was my shadow falling across him. I called Reyes on the radio and asked him to bring the first aid kit and the vehicle to the northern end. While I waited, I looked at the notebook in Cutler's lap. He had made 3 measurement entries at the top of the first page in his standard notation: precise, clean. Exactly what I would expect from him. Then the entries stopped. The remainder of that page was filled with a symbol, repeated line after line. The same angular form, 2 lines meeting at an acute angle with a third crossing through the vertex, drawn in pencil at consistent size and consistent spacing. The symbol covered that page entirely. It covered the next page. It covered the 10 pages after that, 12 pages. In Cutler's handwriting, I turned the notebook so he could see it. He looked at it the way a person looks at something that is in the wrong place, not frightened, confused in a quiet and fundamental way. He said he had made his 3 measurements and had not opened the notebook again. He did not question that the handwriting was his. He simply did not remember producing it. I closed the notebook. I did not show Ray's what was inside. I logged it as a field evidence item, sealed it in a bag, and placed it in the equipment crate. The symbol on those 12 pages was the same pattern as the scratches on the theodolite case. We left the canyon that afternoon. I made no request for an extension of the survey period. I told the district office, in my preliminary report, that the geological assessment was complete and that the closure justification required revision. I did not include in that report anything I have described in this account. I filed the photographs, the measurement data, and the equipment anomaly log. I did not file the catalog entry for the streambed stone arrangement. And I did not file the track photographs. I kept copies of both. The formal incident report, Bureau of Land Management, Arizona, Field Incident 94-Arizona-0371, was filed within 2 weeks. Of our return, a Bureau investigator drove out to the site in mid-May. He spent 1 day on site and conducted separate recorded interviews with all 3 team members. His report, which I received in June, concluded as follows. The ranging rod displacement was attributed to environmental factors, freeze-thaw cycle, and wind activity at elevation, with the note that the drive soil at that location had been assessed as unusually loose. The bipedal track impressions were assessed as probable bear sign, with the notation that photographic documentation was insufficient for species confirmation and that casting had not been performed. The track impression in the stone was not addressed in the report. The stone placement on the theodolite lens was attributed to unknown persons, possibly recreational visitors, accessing the site in violation of the closure designation, and classified as a minor site disturbance. Gerald Cutler's episode was attributed to heat exhaustion combined with dehydration and altitude effects. His field notebook was collected as supporting medical documentation. The notebook was not returned. I submitted a formal written request for its return in July of 1994. The request was acknowledged. The notebook was logged as supporting evidence in an open administrative file and could not be released pending review. The review was never completed. I followed up in September, in November, and in February of the following year. Each response confirmed the file was still open and pending review. After February of 1995, I received no further responses to my requests. A junior investigator in the Bureau's Regional Cultural Resources Office, Sandra Flores, who had been in the position for 2 years and whose work I had found consistently thorough, filed a formal memo in August of 1994 requesting that the incident file be forwarded to the Bureau of Indian Affairs Cultural Liaison for joint review. Her memo cited the site's proximity to protected tribal territory and the documented presence of a tribal avoidance protocol as grounds for coordinated federal assessment. Her memo was returned to her office without notation. Not rejected, not accepted. Returned. She resubmitted it in October with an additional cover letter clarifying the jurisdictional basis. It was returned again. She told me in a phone call that November that she had been advised informally, not in writing, in a hallway, that the parcel in question carried a prior federal designation that superseded standard review protocols. She had asked what that prior designation was. She had been told she did not have the access classification to receive that information. She left the Bureau in the spring of 1995. I have not been in contact with her since. In December of 1994, the Bureau of Land Management issued a formal reaffirmation of the 1969 closure designation for Arizona Field Closure 69-214. The reaffirmation cited the original terrain instability and erosion risk language, word for word, unchanged. No new geological assessment had been conducted. The structural geologists' finding that the original closure justification was geologically inaccurate was not addressed in the reaffirmation document. The file was marked resolved. The canyon was closed again by the same false language, under the same unverifiable signature. Gerald Cutler died in 2019 in Tucson from causes unrelated to the 1994 survey. He had a productive career after that spring. We spoke occasionally over the years at Bureau-adjacent conferences. By phone when something in the news touched on land survey issues we had both worked. He did not bring up the canyon directly after 1994. Once, perhaps 8 years after the survey. I raised it carefully, not the notebook. Just the day at the northern wall. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said he had thought about it. He said there had been a period of roughly 2 years after the survey during which he had not accepted canyon work, slot canyons, box canyons, enclosed systems. He described it as a preference he had developed, not a decision he had made deliberately. He said some places leave a residue. He did not say what kind of residue. He did not elaborate, and I did not press him. I wrote his name in my field notebook when he died. I have written other names there, colleagues and supervisors who passed over the years. It is a habit I formed early, a way of marking time and keeping a personal record that runs alongside the official one. After I wrote his name, I turned back to the entries from April of 1994. The catalog entry for the streambed stone arrangement is still there, a photograph taped to the page, the measurements, the notation. Possible historical marker or boundary indicator. I have looked at that photograph a great many times over 30 years. I have told myself each time that it was exactly what I logged it as, a marker. Something left by people for purposes connected to movement and navigation and territorial knowledge. Something mundane and explicable. Raymond Casa told me, in that Thursday meeting in White River, that the canyon watches for something to return. He said the protocol is not about belief. He said it is about behavior. Institutional behavior, written down, enforced because it must be enforced regardless of whether the people enforcing it understand the reason. I have thought about that distinction for 30 years. The question I was never able to answer, and that no agency I am aware of has ever attempted to answer on any accessible record, is who filed the 1969 closure designation, not who signed it. The name on the document exists, it is legible. It simply does not correspond to any person who worked for the Bureau of Land Management in Arizona in that period. In any adjacent district or in any federal land agency position that year, the name was used. The administrative access required to process a binding federal closure was exercised. The parcel was locked, and the person who did it cannot be identified from any personnel record that has been made available through standard federal disclosure requests. I have one photograph that I took before the notebook was collected. I photographed the pages the evening before we departed the canyon, not because I anticipated the notebook would be taken, but because documenting evidence before it enters a chain of custody is a professional habit I have maintained throughout my career. The photograph shows 12 pages of that angular symbol in Gerald Cutler's handwriting. I have shown that photograph to 3 people since: a linguist, a cultural anthropologist who specializes in southwestern pre-contact material culture, and Raymond Casa. The linguist had no identification. The anthropologist had no identification, though he asked to keep a copy, which I declined. Raymond Casa looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he handed it back to me without speaking. I asked him if he recognized it. He said he recognized the form. I asked him what it meant. He said it was not something he was going to put in writing or say in any conversation he believed might be recorded. I have held that photograph for 30 years. I am not sharing it now. I am describing its existence because its existence is part of the record. And the record is what I was trained to maintain accurately. I am speaking now because the federal land audit that sent me to that canyon in 1994 has been quietly reinitiated. A notice appeared in the Bureau's internal review calendar last year: Arizona Legacy Closures. The 69-214 file is on the list. People will go back inside. The canyon is still there. The closure designation is still active under Bureau of Land Management Arizona Field Closure 69-214. The signature on that original 1969 filing belongs to no one that anyone in any agency has been able to identify. And somewhere in a Bureau of Land Management administrative archive, Gerald Cutler's field notebook is logged as supporting documentation in an open file, pending review. 30 years, the file is still open.